I don't need to introduce him. Just say my name's James Dumay.
Hey, my name's James Dumay. All right, cool. Woo! All right, so usually I have sort of, when I talk about Blue Ocean, I usually have like, I try to get as many opportunities to talk about Blue Ocean, to bring you people the good word of the Blue Ocean as much as possible. And I have several sort of slide decks, I guess, that I go through and I talk about when I talk about things. And then I kind of landed up in Hobart and thought, you know what, like, I think everyone at LCA kind of knows what's up. So I've even depolished the slides, right, to make it more real. And I removed the buzzwords. And I'm actually going to do some demos where I like code a CD pipeline and show you how all of that works in Blue Ocean. So why don't I just kind of get started. So for those of you who don't know, Jenkins is an open source automation server. It's written in Java, has many plugins. It helps people practice continuous delivery and continuous integration. But I've heard of people doing all sorts of crazy things with Jenkins, like using it for scheduling database backups, like using it essentially for a visual cron, all sorts of wacky things. It's a very versatile tool. Just a bit of history about the project. It started back in 2005 at Sun Microsystems. I'm going to pour one for my in memory of my homies at Sun, RIP. But it was started by Kazuki Kawaguchi, I should say the boss's name properly. And he started this as an open source project within Sun. It was called the Hudson Project. It became very, very quickly popular with developers who had been used to cruise control. If you've never heard of cruise control before, it was one of the first CI systems where when you wanted to go and configure stuff, you had to go edit a massive XML file. And the one thing that Hudson at the time, why it became more popular, is that it provided a really nice web UI for you to start automating your tests. So it became very quickly popular, and I think in around 2010, Oracle finished the acquisition of Sun, and things went south very, very quickly for the Hudson project. And there was a big meeting of all of the contributors, and they decided after Oracle tried to trademark the Hudson name, that they would rebrand Jenkins and then continue along development. So I believe the Hudson project still exists, but most of the development is now done as Jenkins, which is great. And I mentioned before, Jenkins is built with extensibility in mind. So today it has thousands and thousands of plugins that do everything from testing to controlling vast amounts of internet infrastructure. There's really, if you think about a plugin that you might want to write for Jenkins, go and have a look on the plugins page because it's probably already been written and you can go and contribute to things there. So it's a great project to be part of, and it has a very vibrant and opinionated community of developers who make this project sing. So it's good. And for those of you who haven't seen, this is kind of what Jenkins looks like today. So at a fundamental level, what you have is a job, and a job runs some level of automation. There are many, many different job types. And this is a real challenge for people coming at CI and CD for the first time because they click the new item button in Jenkins, and then they have to figure out what kind of job type they want, and then depending on what kind of job that they end up using for their automation, there's a different ecosystem of plugins that can help you achieve something with that job type. So you may see this in a lot of other open source projects. Actually, sometimes choice becomes very detrimental to adoption. And that's something I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about today with Blue Ocean. So I want to tell a little bit of a story about, since the project's inception, it's been over, I guess, 10 years, almost 10 years since the project's inception. And we've had this sort of exponential change going across the software industry. And what I mean by this exponential change is what this guy, Mark Andreessen, who's early Netscape guy and now venture capitalist, he talks about software is eating the world. And what he means by this, and I promise I'll get past this really quickly, is he means that, say if you're a Ford Motor Vehicle today, right, and you're producing cars, the value that people find in your car is very different from what it used to be, say, 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, it was all about the engine of the car and how powerful it was. And then today, it's all about how fuel efficient that car is, right? So like the value of that car in people's minds has changed. And the thing that actually transforms that change is that a modern Ford motor vehicle uses onboard software to manage the burn of fuel, so it like knows whether or not you're a highway driver or a street driver if you do long trips or short trips, and adjusts the fuel economy automatically for you, right? So it's actually the computer software that's in everything that is actually driving value in products that you wouldn't have thought they had before. And what that means is that companies that were not software companies 30 years ago are now software companies. And I was just having a chat to a friend of a friend, and she's in financial services, and she has to compete for her job, in Australia against, people worldwide. And what really differentiates her from the other candidates is that they know how to code, right? So she can pull in data from different sources, and at the end of the day, she's sitting in Excel, but she can, these people can write code and pull in data from different resources and do a different kind of analysis and get to a result sooner just because they have the power of software, right? So what's happening is that as this is occurring, the barrier to entry to software is actually lowering. Like what we consider a software developer today is very different from what we can consider a software developer 10 years ago. And so that provides, I guess, a big challenge for people who are creating software development tools, because suddenly the tools that were built for the experts yesterday now need to be not dumbed down, but they need to be accessible by the people who are writing and deploying and using software. So in this story, I have, in 2006, there's this girl called Ada. She's 12. And she's destined to that fate to become a software engineer. And I just want to add some vertigo to how fast, how different the world is, right, in the last 10 years. And, when she starts out in 2006, she's actually living in a world without iPhones, right? Remember we had big LCD monitors. We didn't have smartphones, we had Nokias. I still love my Nokia 5110. I wish I could find it. I don't think it even works in Australia anymore. That's a crazy thing to think about. She's grown up with Facebook and Android and Instagram, and now you can talk to your telephone and order a pizza and get a taxi or message your friend. And then you've got products like Slack, which are just, it's IRC with a better user interface, right? So a lot of this technology is coming sort of down market and being made accessible to everyone. And if you look in the developer tool space, things like version control systems and collaborating, with large groups of people all over the world, like GitHub changed the way that that's done, right? It was a very difficult thing to do before GitHub because the tools weren't made accessible to everyone. The tools were built for the experts. And there's a whole list of different apps. You can see the kind of logos in here that kind of change the way that people, talk to use virtual machines in their local development workflow, or help people build mobile applications or deploy software. And so there's this consumerization of developer tools that's happening as more and more people become software people. So it's a transformative thing. And I guess for us, if she's 12 in 2006, and later on she's 22 in 2017, her world is very different from the world that Jenkins was created in. So if she's going to go out of university and start a software company with her fellow graduates in her university, is she going to pick Jenkins as the tool to power her startup, to deploy all her code and to test things? Maybe not. Maybe there are better tools. So it's a real kind of generational problem that we have when we don't adapt to, I guess, software's built 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and that those tools don't adapt to the change in the world. So I guess we live in a science fiction land, and a lot of the tools that we use are not from the science fiction world. So that kind of brings me to what the Blue Ocean project is. And so it's a new project that rethinks the user experience for Jenkins for modern developers. So it's not just a new UI on Jenkins, it's a whole new way of working, what we think is a modern way of working. It's designed for DevOps teams. So you'll see a little bit later on how we build continuous delivery pipelines, one job type in Jenkins to do that. And it also leverages tools that you already use in your day-to-day workflow. So it's heavily sort of Git-based at the moment. But hey, if something comes along and replaces Git, that's where Blue Ocean wants to be. But today it's Git, it's CD. Tomorrow it could be the next thing. And just a bit of background about the project is I got hired by CloudBees to come work on a SaaS CD product. So we wanted to do like a hosted continuous delivery product. And we put this proposal together, and we kind of showed our executive team, and we showed our advisors for the company. And being the sort of company that funds a lot of Jenkins, they were like, well, if we can make it this simple in a SaaS, why can't we make Jenkins that simple? And so I got the call after I came back on holiday, and it's like, everything's changed. You should go talk to your boss. And he's like, hey, that SaaS product you were building, why don't we make the design of that the new Jenkins? And so it was kind of born out of this commercial desire to kind of adapt to the changing times, but we actually think it's more valuable in open source so that we can empower, I guess, a lot more teams to do continuous delivery. And it's all designed in Australia, which is really cool. So we have a small team in Australia that have designed it and developed it, and then quite a few people sprinkled all around the world who work on this with us at CloudBees and in the community. So let's go and take a look at Blue Ocean. So this is the new, I need to apparently make it larger. Is that better? Better? Okay, cool. So this is the new Jenkins dashboard in Blue Ocean. What you can see here is just a list of all the jobs that I have on this server. I've got this really neat way of favoriting jobs that I'm interested in. I'll go into a little bit about how this is actually made a bit smarter. So if I favorite something, it pops up there, displays the status for that. You'll also see here in the columns of that table sort of how many branches and how many pull requests are passing for each one of those pipelines. The ones with dashes here are sort of the more classic Jenkins freestyle jobs that we have here. So let's go and dive in and have a look at my App Store pipeline. So this is just an example project I use for a lot of demos. What you can see here is a list of all of the runs of that pipeline across branches. We're actually going to build a really nice little branch selector here so that you can look at the history of a particular branch. But you can see, all the way back here, we've had master failing, it's succeeding. I can go back, I can restart a pipeline. One of the great things about Blue Ocean is we use a technology from the W3C called service center events. So as things are happening on the Jenkins server, say like like a pipeline is executing or stops executing or some state changes on the server, the web client actually subscribes to those events and then updates the UI. So there's actually no polling in this web app whatsoever. It's all push out to the server. So it's a really great time to be building web applications because the technology is just suddenly matured out of the horrible pain that we had prior with the web platform. So it's really cool. If we click on branches, we can see all of the branches for this pipeline. So as I'm creating new feature branches or hot fixes or whatever they might be, I'm pushing them back up to my origin, up to GitHub or wherever you host your code. Blue Ocean and Jenkins then pick that up they will execute the pipeline and tell me whether or not that change is going to work okay. And when I open up a pull request, Jenkins will then go and merge validate. I think the previous speaker was talking about the power of merge validation to check that your change is actually going to work when it hits master. So Jenkins will do that for you as well. And one of the neat things is, and you get that for free when you kind of use Blue Ocean and Pipeline together, is when we open that pull request, GitHub offer a really nice way of reporting back the integration status of a change from Jenkins. So that if you're a reviewer on a pull request, you can go back to it and you go through and review the code, and you can see here that Jenkins has picked up that change, it's merge validated it with master, and you can actually go ahead and click merge pull request and things will hopefully work, which is great. Cool. So one of the, I guess, important features about continuous delivery is the concept of this pipeline, right? And so what a pipeline tries to model is, from beginning to end, so where the beginning is developer writes code and the end is customer gets to use the software that you've written, all of the steps that are needed to actually go and deploy, build, test, and deploy that software. So if we open up Blue Ocean, we have this nice visualization here where you can see, from build to package in this case, all of the steps that have occurred in the pipeline to get that software out and have it released. And the pipeline graph here is interactive, so so we're looking at the package step. If I scroll down, you can see the different steps that were involved in that stage for doing the packaging of the software. We can just expand the logs, so it makes it very easy for you to go and navigate through the log files if you need to do some debugging. And clicking on another node here will show you the steps for it as well. So where it gets cool is where we start executing the pipeline. I have to wait for it to do a checkout, I think. Oh, we're not going to work for me. Excuse me. Damn. Oh, I think it's just the network is slow. So what will happen is as the pipeline starts executing, the dot will kind of move across the screen. And then as soon as you kind of navigate away from it, so if I go click on one dot over another, here we go. Yep. Oh, there's a bug there. I shouldn't be doing that. But you can kind of see it follows along as you're executing. So if you've been using Jenkins previously, what you would do, say if you're running a release build or a deployment, is you sit at that screen where the console scrolls along, and it's kind of like drinking from the fire hose. In Blue Ocean, we want to kind of at least give you some context of like where you are up to in that process as you're viewing things. And particularly when the pipeline fails, you can go to, say, a failing run of a pipeline, and you can open it up, and it'll automatically kind of, put your attention on the actual part of the pipeline that's failed, and you don't have to search through 10,000 lines of log, which is really handy. Cool. Alrighty. So what actually powers all of this in the background is a plugin that we call Jenkins Pipeline. And the way that it works is you have a file. Can everyone see that up on screen? I might actually even try and bump up my text. So here's just another example project that I have created. It's just a small Java project that really does nothing, but you can compile and run some tests. So the way that we define a pipeline in Jenkins is through this Jenkins file. What's really great about having the definition of your pipeline inside the Git repository is that it gets versioned along with your application code. So if you need to go back to a previous revision and re-release, and the CI configuration has changed, you might not be able to do that with sort of the traditional config stored in the CI tool method. So you can go back, you can also submit new changes that might need, say, changes to the pipeline in order to integrate correctly. And so if you have that on a branch, it'll pick up the Jenkins file inside that branch and run it and do all of the merge validation and all of the pretty stuff. So with Blue Ocean, what we've tried to do is simplify the existing pipeline language. So prior to Blue Ocean, there was a Groovy DSL. So Groovy is a JVM scripting language that was kind of a little bit, it's a bit esoteric, it's a bit hard to use, it was under-documented. And what we've gone and done is, instead of having essentially a Turing-complete programming language in which you define your pipeline, we've created a more declarative syntax that is, that I guess is less like a scripting language and more like a config file. And I think, from the feedback that we've gotten, this is the kind of thing that people are more used to with other CI tools as well. But it has all of the power that Jenkins Pipeline had previously given people, but was just inaccessible because it was just so difficult to use. So I'll show you what a pipeline looks like, and we'll set one up using Blue Ocean, and we can have a look at the visualization. So we start with a pipeline block. And first we declare some stages. So stages are the things that, build, browser test, static analysis, package. So we'll start with stages. And we'll call this one build. We'll put some steps in here. So this is just a Java Maven project. So I can go and run a shell step, which is Maven clean compile. And I might even run another stage here called test. Oops. We'll just do a test. And we can also here say to the pipeline that when we've completed, anytime that we've completed the pipeline, whether or not successful, it succeeds or it fails, we want to pick up the test report files so that you can view them from the Blue Ocean UI. So I think that looks a little bit like that. So we use the JUnit test framework, and there's a directive in pipeline that allows us to pull that out. So you can model all sorts of different things in here, including parallels. So like in a stage, if I want to break off and go ahead and test across different browsers, which is a pretty common pattern for testing when you're doing web applications, you can do that. Maybe we can improve this example after I get this one running. And there are steps for almost anything you can think of, executing Puppet, Ansible, Chef, you name it, Jenkins has an integration with it. So it's definitely worth having a look and seeing if it supports your tools, or if it doesn't yet support your tools, we would love some contributions so that we can share the love. So, okay, so I think that pipeline looks good. Let's just give it a quick look. Pipeline stages. Oh, and one thing, we need to actually tell this pipeline where we want to go and run it. So as I mentioned before, this project is actually a Java project. And this is just another one of those occasions where the stars have aligned for technology. Now with Docker, we no longer have to keep sort of pet CI infrastructure around. We can just have developers produce a Docker container that they can run their tests in, and then the person who maintains the testing servers, the CI servers, just has to have Docker installed. So what we can do, we can just say we want agent Docker, and I think what we can do is we can use the OpenJDK package, OpenJDK image. And so what this will do is that when Jenkins starts executing this pipeline, it'll spin up a brand new container, run the pipeline within it, and then after it's done, it'll get rid of the Docker container. So you've always got a nice, clean, repeatable environment every time you run your pipeline. There's also another feature here. I think you can say, Docker local file and then give it a path to a Docker file. And what it will do is before it runs your pipeline, it will, from your Git repository, it'll take that Docker file, build a Docker image, then run your pipeline within it. Right? So not only is your configuration for your pipeline versioned in along with the application code, so is all your testing infrastructure. And that's just really, really good. That excites me as a tools nerd. So, and having, I spent, I think, 3.5 years as a build engineer, so I've definitely felt the pain of having to maintain those, that pet infrastructure. All right, so let's go and commit this to my repository. So you can see I just have this LCA demo. We'll add the Jenkins file. I'm on the right branch. Yep. Now, what I'm going to show you is something that we haven't yet shipped yet. So it's going to excite the developer who's working on it that I presented this, or scare him because he might think that there's bugs in it or something. But we're going to give it a go anyway. So if we go back to my LCA demo, we can see our Jenkins file in here. What I'll do is I'll just copy that Git URL, pop over here, and then I have to go to a feature flag. So this will be shipping in the next 2 weeks. We just need to do some design changes to it. So I had said before, sometimes the amount of choices that you have in Jenkins, sometimes, people start having issues with adoption, right? So it's like, what out of all of the 20, 25 job types that Jenkins provides, which one is the right job type that's going to get the job done for me? And so in Blue Ocean, it's our mission to be opinionated and guide users, particularly new users, on how to use the system right for the first time. And so we've settled on one job type, which we believe is, I guess, gives you the most bells and whistles. And that's called a multi-branch pipeline. So it's a pipeline that understands branches and pull requests. So all of that UI that I walked through before, it's the thing that makes that a reality. So if I click New Pipeline, it simply asks me, where do I store my code? I'll say Git. I'll paste in my repository URL, and I'll just say use the system SSH on this machine. And it goes completed. Okay. And we'll just have to wait. So we're going to make this a little bit smoother. Oh, there it is. That's cool. So I think now what it's doing is just probably pulling the source code. So we'll just give it a second. So one thing we still need to fix is that if you're on, say, a dodgy Wi-Fi, like airport Wi-Fi or conference Wi-Fi, is that sometimes those events don't come through. So we've got some fixes that are going in for that, so the UI always updates. So what it's done now is it's spun up that OpenJDK container. It's now executing, checking out the source code within that container. Oh, test, cool. And there was some, it couldn't find a tool for me. Oh, that's a shame. So I couldn't find the Maven tool. So I think the image I used was not correct. So that's kind of sad. Oh well. So that's kind of how you define a pipeline in Jenkins. Now, one of the things we do want to do is, like, when we were talking to Jenkins users, and particularly people who had, like, read about continuous delivery and wanted to start practicing it, is people have different comfort levels, right? So there's a lot of people who are happy to go and write a Groovy script that controls their pipeline. There are people who want to go and configure their pipeline, using a config file format. So we kind of address that with the new, the new declarative pipeline language. And there are also some people who are completely uncomfortable. They might write software, but they're uncomfortable with, thinking about, how to visualize that pipeline within a text file. right? So some people are just inherently want to use UIs to define this stuff. So this is the cool thing. So now that we have a more declarative way of defining pipelines, what we actually have is a memory model which we can use to build tools that manipulate the Jenkins file. So if you're familiar with like the halting problem, which is a hard computer science problem, if you're trying to build a visualization of an executing program, that can be kind of a hard thing to do and to get right, unless you're up for winning a Nobel Prize in mathematics. So what we can do is just take this pipeline that we wrote in a text editor, and we can switch over to this new thing that we call the pipeline, the visual pipeline editor. I can paste this in here, so this is still under active development. And now you can see the different steps that we set up for those build and test stages. And what I can do here is, if I wanted to go and say, create a parallel, I just click on that button. It says, okay, I now have test and second test. I can search for a script. I can run the script. And then I can export it again as a Jenkins file. So the vision will be, the vision is that what we'd really like to do is, you remember when we created that pipeline for the first time and we plugged in the Git repository details, if we detect that there's no Jenkins file in there, we'd love to move people over to the editor, and the editor will have some hints in there to help you build that first pipeline. And then when you click the save button, it actually goes ahead and commits that back to your Git repo if you've got the right permissions. And that way you can have a team full of people who may be more comfortable working in a text editor, or maybe more comfortable working from the visual editor. You can have those people collaborating on the same team and working on the same definition of that CD pipeline. So this is a pretty new thing for Jenkins, actually writing things back to the Git repository. So we're still working on sort of the core APIs and things that make that possible. So, cool. So what we're aiming to do for Blue Ocean is have a sort of first release with the stuff that I showed you in a sort of more polished form by the end of March this year. And then we'll be moving to sort of a more like Chrome-like, continuous release model where we'll be releasing, every week, have sort of, major new features in every month. We are looking for more contributors as well. So there's an active group of users who join us on, we're on Gitter, which is like a chat, like you can kind of think of it as like IRC chat built around Git. We have about 35, 36 people in there actively talking about Blue Ocean every day, but what we are looking for particularly is developer contributors. Blue Ocean's developed in JavaScript, mostly in React.js and ES6. So all new fancy JavaScript front-end stuff, which isn't really the natural turf, home turf of the Jenkins developer community. So there's some people in the community there that are trying to learn more about JavaScript, but we'd love to have external contributors come in, and now that we're not only just a Java project and we have other languages, to invite those people in and grow the developer community. So, cool. Sweet. So thank you very much. So you can learn more about Blue Ocean if you go to jenkins.io/project/blueocean. If anyone's got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Purple shirt guy.
You mentioned you described this initially as a different front end.
Mm-hmm.
Can you switch back to the old front end? Does this change the server-side guts?
No, absolutely not. So let's head back over here. The only thing that we've done differently is taken over this /blue URL path. So if you go to Blue, it'll take you to Blue Ocean. If you remove that, it'll take you to the Jenkins Classic that you know and love.
And all the same pipeline stuff are all in there. It's all just, yeah, nice. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I had another question, if I can be greedy. This is not a hypothetical question. I spent last week setting up our new Jenkins server for work. What's the sort of maturity status of this? Is this something I could install now and it'll have a few rough edges but will basically work? Or if I roll it out now, like next week,
Yep.
will it disappoint and scare away all of the potential users at my company?
That's a good question. So one thing that we've tried to do is build Blue Ocean in a pretty iterative way. So until when the sort of pipeline creation thing that I just showed, until that lands, we've really had nothing that modifies the state or the configuration of the server other than just installing the plugins. So if you do try it and it does hose your system, you can just disable it and everything goes back to normal. To be honest, that rarely ever happens or has happened. Occasionally we've had people try and do weird things like install all the plugins manually, and that's kind of, if you use the plugin manager, you're scot-free. The only thing that it will do is when you install Blue Ocean, it will rewrite all of the URLs that get issued in emails and hit chat notifications so that they go to Blue Ocean. But there's a change coming so that you can either individually prefer the Blue Ocean UI or your Jenkins Classic UI. So there'll be a switch to turn that on and off. So we call it a beta just because we haven't got all the features completed. And I guess like the only thing that you might run into on a sort of week-to-week basis are sort of some bugs as the natural churn of the project occurs. But we're hoping like by March, at the moment we're just in sort of the home run to fix bugs. So we're hoping that things kind of get more stable by then. But we use it every day. So we use Blue Ocean on blueocean.io every day to test Blue Ocean, and we deploy this multiple times a day. So we've got a real finger on the pulse of like what stuff is working and what stuff isn't working. And if stuff doesn't work, it's basically a tools down for all of the paid contributors to make it work, re-release, then continue the development. So, yeah, cool.
Hi, I was wondering, do you have any scope for running this against pipeline jobs, or is it possible to create a pipeline job without a Jenkins file? Because we've got repos that we don't actually have control over.
Oh, yes, so it is possible. There's several different pipeline jobs. So let me just log in over here and I'll show you the differences. So yeah, there's several different pipeline jobs. So there's the one that we create in our new create pipeline workflow. That's a multi-branch pipeline, so that requires the Jenkins file to be in an SEM. The other one that you can use is just the pipeline job type. So if we just go foo, oops. Sometimes the classic UI has a few little bugs in it. And you can kind of write your pipeline script and put it in this box here and it'll do its thing. Yeah. It won't be multi-branch. So one way that you could get around, sorry, what's that?
I was going to jump in here. So I'm Tyler, I run the Miniconf. I also work on the Jenkins project. What you can do, which is actually quite interesting, and I've seen a number of people do it, is they'll have a multi-branch pipeline that is configured in their test repository, their acceptance test harness type repository. And there's a couple steps in pipeline, like the Git pipeline, to grab source code from elsewhere. So even if you can't write to the specific repository, you can still use some of the same tooling that James showed and refer to where the source code is outside. The nice thing about multi-branch pipeline with how James showed it is it sort of assumes that where you pull the Jenkins file from, that's where your source code is going to come from, and we can short circuit a couple of steps to make it easier.
So yeah, there's a, yes?
All right, so I am quite interested in this, but I need to use Launchpad and Bazaar. To what extent is the SCM pluggable here? Will we be able to hook this in with your stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. It's super, super pluggable. So we're doing a lot to make the reference implementation to make a good reference implementation of I guess the multi-branch pipeline SCM API. So there is an API that you need to implement. We're kind of improving the GitHub one at the moment. So there's just a standard Git one that doesn't give you any of the pull requests or that kind of stuff, because Git's that's not not a concept that's really built into Git, but the more, I guess, sophisticated example is the GitHub branch source. So yeah, you can look at that one and use it to produce your own one. So you could even just fork it and change a bunch of things inside of it to get it to do what you want. Cool. And yeah, it would be great to get that contribution to the project too.
Is the entire pipeline being run on a single slave, or the thing which I'd like to do is like have, say, check out the code once and then fan it out to a number of systems on different architectures. So like I want to test my code that it's running on x86, ARM, and whatever else. Is that possible or easy?
So yeah, so thanks. It's James, right? Yes, I thought I recognized your face. So that's a great question. So what you can do, so this agent syntax, like if I don't want to use Docker, I can just say, use a node that has a Jenkins node that has a particular label, just as you would any other job type in Jenkins. So I could change this to node. I can change this to, maybe I can change this to Linux. So this will run on any Linux system. And I may actually say, like, as I'm testing down here, I may want to run this on Linux ARM, right? And it will go ahead and run that on there. And I believe you can use that same syntax within a parallel as well. So if we pull out the parallel, actually I don't know what the syntax is, so I won't embarrass myself. So, yeah. But yes, you can do that kind of testing pretty easily. And what's really cool is I know there are a couple of OpenStack people and other cloud infrastructure folks around. If you wanted to extend that agent syntax to plug in your own Docker-like thing or your own agent-like thing, it's totally possible to do that with Jenkins. It's infinitely flexible. So you can provide this great user experience to people who are using your tools to run CI/CD workloads by extending the Jenkins and Pipeline APIs to do that. Any other questions? Okay, cool. All right, thank you very much.